evening to you.
Okay, good morning everyone. It's 9:30 and we need to start because we need to cover a lot of topics today. Thank you, Dr. Jeff, for sharing your knowledge, for your time. Most importantly, thank you, Dr. Morales, for moderating this session, for helping us have this seminar. It all started with you. Thank you so much. And also, Dr. Laureta, thank you for sharing with us your precious Sunday. I know you are so busy, just like everyone else. Thank you so much. Uh, I think let's start. So to really start this session, I would like to acknowledge Dr. Cristina Laureta, our host today. Dr. Laureta has been a member of the faculty of the graduate program in orthodontics, College of Dentistry, UP Manila for over 25 years. She obtained her Certificate of Proficiency in Orthodontics and her Master of Science in Dentistry, Orthodontics from the same institution in 1992 and 2013 respectively. At present, she also serves as a consultant at the Pediatric Dentistry Division of Philippine Children's Medical Center and the Pediatric Dentistry of the Philippines. She is a fellow of the Association of Philippine Orthodontists, Academy of Dentistry International, and the International College of Dentists. Dr. Cristina Laureta is currently the College Secretary of the UP College of Dentistry. Dr. Laureta, please take the stage.
Hello, good morning to everyone and a blessed Sunday to all of our participants. I would like to welcome our distinguished speaker, Dr. Jeff Bynum, who will be sharing with us the wonders of hypochlorous acid. I would also like to welcome our moderator, Dr. Regina Morales, who I will be introducing in a few seconds. I will be co-hosting this webinar with Dr. Femeril Dumlao. And this is a very timely webinar as we are all just learning to deal with the threat of COVID-19, not only in our clinics in particular, but also in our lives in general. I'm sure we all have many questions on the effectivity of hypochlorous acid. What is it? Is it effective? Is it really safe? And also for us dentists, is it cost effective? Hopefully all of these questions and more will be addressed by the lecture and the question and answer that we will have later on. And so now let me briefly introduce Dr. Regina Morales, our moderator, who was in a way instrumental in the birth of this webinar. So Dr. Regina Isabel B. Santos-Morales obtained her degree of dental medicine from the University of the Philippines and the Certificate of Periodontics from the School of Dental Medicine, University of Pennsylvania, USA in 1992 and 1995 respectively. She then became a clinical instructor and a full-time lecturer of the Department of Periodontics at the same institution from 1995 to 1996. Then, she became the Nobel Biocare Implant Fellow from 1996 to 1997 at the Implant Center of the University of Pennsylvania School of Dental Medicine. Dr. Morales placed second in the Philippine Dental Board examination out of 1,628 candidates during the 1992 Dental Board examinations. She was awarded the Director's Award, Chase Scholarship Award, and Coslet Scholarship Award in May 1995 from the University of Pennsylvania School of Dental Medicine. She is the first Filipino diplomate of the American Board of Periodontology practicing in the Philippines. She is also diplomate of the Philippine Board of Periodontology, where she is a member of the said board. She's a fellow of the International College of Dentists, an active member of the Philippine Dental Association, international member of the Academy Dentistry of Periodontology, and an active speaker of the Speakers Bureau of the Philippine Dental Association. Dr. Morales is a lecturer and a clinical instructor of the Basic Periodontal Therapy Workshop of the Philippine Society of Periodontology Basic Course Seminar. Her practice exclusively focuses on periodontics and implant dentistry. She's an active consultant of St. Luke's Medical Center Global City, Taguig City, and Makati Medical Center, Makati City. So Dr. Morales, it's all in your hands.
Good morning, everybody. And good morning, Dr. Dumlao. Good morning, Dr. Laureta. And to all our colleagues, faculty, family, and friends. Good evening to our distinguished lecturer, Dr. Bynum, who is all the way in Florida. Now, we are all excited to hear and listen to learn what is hypochloric acid is all about. I first heard about this only because of the advent of SARS-CoV-2 and how important it is for us to upgrade our existing sanitation and disinfecting procedures everywhere, with ourselves, our office, our clinics. As the pandemic started to rise in March 2020 onwards, our lockdown has given us dentists enough time to acquire emerging guidelines and protocols to implement in clinics to mitigate any risk of transmission, be it from droplets, fomites, or aerosols. A lot of our knowledge, it's not moving. Can you see it moving, Fem?
No, no, Doc.
Why it's not moving? Yeah. A lot of our knowledge came from webinars and Viber groups that we all shared. Some were family matters, some were intense with discussions, some sharing caring, inspiring, prayerful messages, and some full of Pinoy humor that kept us all sane all these times. Not to mention all those fake news is going around. But for us dentists, we stayed abreast of what's expected of us before opening our offices to accept patients safely. This meant following protocols whether we liked it or not, and we had all our own checklists. I clearly remember one post that mentioned HOCl through a video from South Korea. I got so intrigued by it, watched it. It is from the company Megagen, and this is in particular released by Megagen Canada, posted May 14, 2020. So why use HOCl? According to them, what is actually hypochlorous acid? They say that it was easy to use. It has a wide range of applicability, either as a surface disinfectant, mist, or fogging. It can be used quickly. It has a broad spectrum of killing at least 99.9% of the pathogens. They're readily available and have relatively low toxicity to humans and animals. And the best was the costs are lower. So I said, what could this be? So we'll just play this shortly. So it's made in Korea. The Koreans are very well prepared, well equipped. The disinfecting gadgets and solutions are all Korean made.
Easy to use when only small amounts of HOCl are required. Add 1.5 liters of water and 30 milliliters of the reagent. Then after about 5 minutes, you get weak hypochlorous acid at 100 ppm with a pH of 4 to 5. Plus, you can adjust the time and ingredients to get a higher ppm. This device can also be operated with various voltages from 110 to 230 volts. When using HOCl to disinfect large spaces, we recommend using an ultra-low volume fogger like this, which takes 3 to 4 liters of HOCl. The motor output is 1,550 watts, and it has a fogging range of 7 to 11 meters. The dispenser can also be adjusted to discharge up to 1.2 liters per minute with various particle sizes from 20 to 50 micrometers. So, for a 150 square meter space, the fogger will need 2 to 3 liters of HOCl, and the disinfection process will take about 20 minutes. After spraying, close the door for 2 to 3 minutes, then open a window to circulate the air. By the way, When fogging, just to be safe, it's best to wear goggles, masks, and gloves. In the case of a frequently trafficked building, the use of an HOCl misting machine at the entrance is an effective way to reduce the coronavirus from being carried inside on clothing and on belongings. Each visitor just presses the foot pedal, then a small amount of HOCl mist is released. This is perfect for entrances to clinics, restaurants, grocery stores.
So not only did they use it for disinfecting surfaces, but they also use it for clothes of patients before entering the facility, and also as a disinfectant solution for cold fogging machine for the entire clinic. I was pretty amazed. So I had an idea. I called up my good friend, Dr. Marie Valentine Lim, who's a prosthodontist, finished in the University of Washington in Seattle, and is currently an instructor for 15 years now at the University of Pennsylvania School of Medicine of the dental school. And she tells me that when the dental school opened in June, HOCl, hydrochlorous acid, was the choice of disinfectant for the school. They provided HOCl sprays in all clinic bays for them to use as a spray for surfaces, equipments, and even themselves with their gowns on. Very interesting. So this gave me more confidence to learn about it. For some reason, it's not working. So the e-clean machine is very practical. It was shown as a picture at the video. So I researched e-clean, and it was $450 in Korea, and in the USA, it was $260. And then I found many other options that were cheaper in the market. And however, I learned from another BFF friend of mine that when he bought this machine, he was complaining of some residues that were left behind as soon as he used the system. And not only that, was that his brand new air purifier broke. And the reason was, upon opening the inside part, that the filter was all clogged with salt crystals. So maybe the machine he had was not producing the correct HOCl all along. So I thought, how could I or we put all our trust in a picture, put our life if they possess not good material with science behind it? So I continued my research and found out that there is a big difference in terms of material to use for the electrolysis cells. Some may use the cheapest kind, which is iron, which means that the anode part corrodes fast, it rusts the solution, the sediments stay at the bottom of the solution, and it becomes yellowish. Some would use stainless steel. But this is a big no-no because it releases exorbitant amount of chromium in solution, which is carcinogenic. And of course, the titanium, which has a very good usage for this. So titanium electrolysis cells must be manufactured with high-grade titanium. Systems using electrolysis cells that are manufactured from lower quality alloy will deteriorate quickly and may not be generating hypochlorous acid. So if the electrolysis cell is made of lower grade metals, it will deteriorate quickly and will generate harmful chromium compounds that can be carcinogenic. So apparently, eClean 50 and Ecolux machine in the US has the same manufacturer in Korea, Keytech Electrochemical Corporation. They own the patent for these brands, and they are US FDA, EPA, and CE registered and or approved. They have science to show this too. So KTCC has been producing similar kinds of machines since 2001 and has been used around the world. So what did I do in my little office as I started in June? So I did get a fogger to use in my office using hydrochlorous acid. It is one of my first line of defense against SARS-CoV-2 virus that could possibly enter my clinic through patients' clothes, aside from using it to disinfect my plastic divisions for my modified negative pressure room. And with this, I have found my friends and patients asking its benefits. So it's nice to share new things or new find that will fit our new norm that hopefully works. So this is how I have my patients spin around the HOCl. They would always be wearing their masks when they do this. Now, even though it is new to us, fogging with a safe solution has been done in many public areas around us that we were not really aware of. And from my research, gosh, there were just so many places where fogging are actually being done. And HOCl has actually a lot of other applications that have been used for more than 30 years or even 100 years. So now is the time to know the science behind the HOCl. Now, just about the same time in May 2020, the COI Center came up with its recommendation entitled The Navigating the Delivery of Dental Care in the Midst of the COVID-19 Pandemic. They pretty much filtered what we really needed to know based on their own independent research of what was out there. The COI Center is a well-renowned evidence-based teaching center based in Seattle, Washington. The COI Center is the only education program in the country in the US conducting and publishing independent research. What I like about them is that they are a self-funded learning center that do not accept sponsorship funding and are not swayed by the agenda or message of sponsors. So that's where we found our handsome speaker, Dr. Jeff Bynum. He's the expert in hydrochlorous acid. With all the surface disinfectant options out there, they chose to recommend hydrochlorous acid. And today, together with our sponsors, eClean and MEM and DDM, we are here to discover HOCl. So, let me introduce Dr. Jeff. Dr. Jeff Bynum graduated from the University of Tennessee, USA in 1995. He then became a mentor of the COI Center, Washington, in Seattle in 2003. He was a clinical instructor up until 2005 up to the present, and an advisory board member in 2014 up to the present. An alumni committee for 3 years, from 2011 to 2014, and an exam committee chairman in the same institution in 2014 until 2018. Dr. Jeff also became a clinical and a surgical instructor at the ICAR Teaching Center in 2010 up to 2016. He is a member of the American Academy of Cosmetic Dentistry and affiliate of the International Congress of Oral Implantology, and a member of the American Dental Association. Without further ado, here is Dr. Jeff Bynum.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me. It is evening here, but good morning to you all. I'll tell you the first thing when my wife found out that I was going to be speaking with you, she got very excited. And I think she was excited because she thought I was going to be traveling there to get me out of the house. So, you know, having been quarantined or trapped in our home for some time, I think she was ready for me to leave the country, if not the house. And then as I began to discuss what it was all about and where the webinar would be seen, I explained to my children that I would be having this talk with you, and we discussed the time differences. And as my 10-year-old got a grasp on the time differences, he said, "Oh, so they're like in the future." So you are a future set of human beings, to him at least, anyway. So so maybe you can tell us what's going to happen in the lottery next week. I don't know, but that would be great. Just very quickly, I wanted to say about the COI Center. You'll see somewhere I have my COI Center shirt on, and I mention that because my opinion is that the COI Center is the finest teaching institution in the world. Now, I'm a little biased because I've been there for a long time, and I teach there. And the reasons why I teach there, by the way, Florida is as far away from Seattle, Washington as you can get, and still remain in the United States. So I travel there regularly to the Coys Center to learn and to grow and teach. And I do that several times a year, 6 times a year or so. And I could have easily chosen an institute close to my home, but instead I chose one all the way across the country. And the reason that I chose the Coys Center is because several of the things that you mentioned, it's a science-based institute. As you mentioned, we don't take money from manufacturers. We don't take money from companies. We are funded by our members and those that take the courses. And so we say what we find in the literature. We do the research and we read the literature and we speak from the literature. And that's how we've done that, or John Coys has done that from the very beginning. And then of course, it all filters down to us who are helping in that realm. So I wear my Coys Center shirt proudly. And I also wanted to say that before this task force was developed, I didn't know anything about hypochlorous acid. I hadn't ever heard of it. I knew about Clorox. I knew about bleach. I knew it was called sodium hypochlorite, but I didn't even know what that meant. But as we began to do the research, we were tasked as a task force to develop best practices for the dentists as we went back to treating our patients. And it's a big deal because, as I mentioned, I believe that the Coys Center is the finest teaching institution in the world. And so if I'm tasked with a project or a topic, then I want to make sure that the information that I'm delivering is directly from the science and that it is a recommendation that would be of quality to everyone, not just the Coys Center tribe, but to everyone around the world. So yes, you're correct. We did settle on hypochlorous acid. And so I became very knowledgeable about hypochlorous acid in a short period of time. I have done a significant amount of research in the literature, as well as purchasing the equipment and making every different type of batch of solution of hypochlorous acid solution. What you'll see in the literature is called HAS, hypochlorous acid solution. I've made multiple batches of those with different formulations to be able to make sure that we could come up with something that was predictable and safe and that people could reproduce it. So I have put together a few things here that I wanted to show you so that we could discuss some of this. And although the science is very important to me, I want to deliver that science, but I don't want to beat you up with the science. I just want you to see it and I want you to hear it. I have no intention of reading all of these slides to you. There's one that I will read, but otherwise we'll hit the highlights of them. And then if there are questions from there, then certainly I'll be available to answer those. But hypochlorous acid, as already has been shown in the intro, is a very simple little molecule, hydrogen and oxygen and chlorine, the chloride ion anyway. And so if you, let's see, does this not go? You have the same problem. Let me see if I can make it go. So share my screen again, and there we go. So hypochlorous acid is a strong oxidant, but it's natural. It's in the body, and we use it in our immune system in our own body. And you can read there that how that works, and we'll discuss that a little bit more later. It is a chlorine-based disinfectant that we've been using in this country at least for decades, since the 1700s for sure. And then it became widely used in the 1900s and still being used today all over the place. Any chlorine-based disinfectant, it's disinfectant property is dependent on free available chlorine. Chlorine is what does the work. And HOCl is just one of the chlorine-based disinfectants. There are multiple ones. And so this type of product has been studied widely by many different people, and you'll see what I mean in just a moment. But HOCl in particular has proven to be more efficacious, has proven to be stronger in its disinfectant properties than most, if not all, of the other chlorine-based disinfectants, particularly the ones that are safe. Hypochlorous acid is much safer than bleach. It's less caustic. It's much safer than many of the other products. And because it's pretty simple, it's water and salt, and then some form of electrolysis. You can see down at the bottom here that HOCl has been used in every industry that you could think about, and ones that you put in your mouth. The food industry uses it to clean all of the food and all of the food making products. The grocery stores use them to clean the vegetables and different foods, and the dairy companies and all the hospitals and healthcare workers, and even around children. It's even a product that's placed in diapers for children. So you can see it's on the EPA list to effectively kill the human coronavirus, the SARS-2 virus, and it's in your water, and we use it to disinfect water. So, okay, it does work. It's pretty
Dr.
simple.
Jeff,
Yes, ma'am.
I was told to use the pad to
Yes,
change.
I got it. Thank you, because I tried the buttons too many times, and now I figured out how to make it work. So thank you for that. But anyway, it's pretty easy to make hypochlorous acid. And basically, if you just take some chlorine and some water, then you put them together, you'll get hypochlorous acid. You could take some bleach and add water to it, and you'll also get hypochlorous acid. You could take hydrogen peroxide and add some chlorine to it, and you'll get hypochlorous acid. But they're not stable. They're not stable, and in fact, hypochlorous acid as a solution is not stable without some assistance. But if you were to take simply table salt, and well, non-iodized salt anyway, just NaCl, and add some water to that, then take an anode and a cathode, and then you will develop HOCl. But the percentages of the HOCl would be dependent upon the pH. And I'll show you how that plays out in the next few slides. But the cathode and the anode are very important. If you don't have a good quality cathode and a good quality anode, then you're not going to get the solutions that you're looking for that have the disinfectant properties and that have the safety factor. So pH is very important to help to regulate those. Not only does it help to regulate it, you'll see in this slide that HOCl is a neutral ion. It penetrates the bacterial cell or the viral cell and penetrates that because it doesn't have a charge to it. Whereas hypochlorite ion, the OCl negative, then has to work on the outside of the cell. It doesn't penetrate through the cell. Whereas the HOCl can penetrate into the middle of the cell and work on the protein lipid in there and lyse the cell much quicker and much easier, more effective. But to maintain the appropriate amount of hypochlorous acid, it's dependent upon the pH. You'll see in a moment that it will become clear that the lower the pH, the more hypochlorous acid you'll have. The higher pH, the more hypochlorite ion that you'll have. And the hypochlorite ion is sodium hypochlorite, that's one, calcium hypochlorite, that's another. But it is a disinfectant, but it's not as effective, and it does have some other caustic features that are not as safe and not as healthy for us. So the more effective disinfectant is the HOCl, and it's what we want to help to kill everything that we need to kill, and it's what we want to be able to maintain safety of ourselves and our offices and our patients and our staff members, our team members. I did it again. But the biggest challenge is to create that weak acid where the HOCl is the most stable, but maintain the pH in the proper range so that we don't have a chlorine gas and so that we don't have the majority hypochlorite ions. Instead, we want it to be the hypochlorous acid, and we don't want it to revert back to water and salt, because that will be relatively ineffective as well. So if you look at this diagram, you can see pretty clearly that the effective disinfectant range is somewhere in the 5 to 6.5 range of pH. And you can get some HOCl down even 100% down to a pH of 4, but the problem there is if you get below 4, then the chlorine ions are more available at that point, and then they will sometimes bind with each other, and then you'll get Cl2, which is chlorine gas. So if you maintain your pH in the 5 to 6.5 range, then you'll not only have a 99 to 100% ion of HOCl, then you'll also have very safe and effective disinfectant that doesn't have an odor and that isn't difficult for your staff and your patients in your office. Now, the last thing that we want is another smell in our offices. You know, with eugenol and years ago, we had a lot of that difficulty with smells. We got rid of those smells. And so now we don't want to add chlorine to that as well, because it does have an odor if it gets too low in the pH or too acidic. I wanted you to see where that diagram came from. It's from the George Clifford White Handbook of Chlorination. And what does he say in there is that that hypochlorous acid contains a very low concentration of chlorine that's odorless and has no negative impact on food. It's also very effective to kill microorganisms and spores, and it's gentle to the environment and to the people, to the humans, and it has a wide range of applications, as we've already discussed, and of course, non-toxic. So all the things that we want. Just to beat the pH to a pulp, I'll show you which is very important. As you look at this diagram, you can see that the amount of HOCl is higher the lower the pH, but at a range between 5 and 6.5 is where you'll have the most amount of HOCl with the least amount of hypochlorite ion. So it's very important, in my estimation, to measure that, to be able to see what you have in your solution. What probably cannot be represented here fairly well is that the pH and the free available chlorine will change over time, and it will change based on the condition. It will change based on the amount of water, the type of water that you have. It will change also based on even the sunlight you have. Different times of day, more free available chlorine than other times of day. In the evenings, when the sun's down, you'll have more free available chlorine. So I think it's important to understand your solution. You can buy the machines and you can buy the solutions and you can develop these in your office and build them and have your staff do it. You can delegate it, that's fine. But I think it's important to understand your solution. You know exactly what you've got. It's colorless, it's odorless, and relatively tasteless. So you don't really know what you have unless you test it. So I think it's very important with a now, there's a lot of science, and like I told you, I'm not going to beat you up with the science, but they've been studying HOCl for a very long time in multiple places. The WHO has studied hypochlorous acid, and everything that you see there is exactly what we're talking about now. The CDC has studied it, and if you look at the things that I've highlighted, they show very clearly that it kills mycoplasma and vegetative bacteria and tuberculosis and just about everything. It kills it fairly readily. You'll see also that it talks about parts per million and certain parts per million that will kill certain things and certain parts per million that may not kill it. But those are based on an average kill time or an average dwell time, the amount of time that the solution has been in contact with whatever it is that they're trying to kill. And I'll discuss that further in just a moment. I put this slide here from the CDC because I wanted you to see that clearly these chlorine-based disinfectants are effective in killing most anything. The previous slide showed HIV, norovirus, just about everything. But notice what it shows here is when they talk about blood spills, they talk about decontaminating blood spills. And for small spills, they say, fine, you can use sodium hypochlorite bleach, but also if you imagine what we just saw earlier was that hypochlorous acid is even more effective. So you could use hypochlorous acid. But then when it talks about large spills, then they say that the concentration has difficulty reaching all of the red blood cells. So this is why I will recommend that we still continue to use our EPA registered disinfectants just the same way that we always did. You can use HOCl as an adjunct, but I still would recommend that you use whatever EPA registered disinfectant that you are using to clean your rooms anyway. And that's the reason why, just that little bit. So I'm going to leave this up here just for a moment. If you want to screenshot it or something, it does show the websites for the literature, not all of the literature to be sure, but some literature there to discuss. Well, actually, this number one here is a really nice article that talks about all types of disinfection. I think that's actually a good read. Number two there, ORP, stands for oxidation reduction potential. I'll discuss further in just a moment, which is something else that I think is very important for you to understand. Of course, chlorine basics. Anytime you're talking about chlorine disinfectants or chlorine-based disinfectants, understanding chlorine, and most of that literature comes from the pool and water sanitation companies. So, but it's all the same. It all comes from chlorine. And then, of course, HOCl, there's hundreds of publications. Those are just a few. And then fogging is something that's already been mentioned that we'll discuss a little bit as well. And so I think it's important to understand that. Then, of course, the EPA has done multiple studies, and then the CDC has done multiple studies as well. So I just wanted to make sure you had some reference for the literature so that if you wanted to look it up, I don't have to read it to you, and you don't have to fall asleep while I read it to you. Thank you for that. Of course, HOCl is antiviral and antibacterial, and so I did put this particular study here to show that they were using hypochlorous acid in this study as a wound care agent. That is, they were placing it on the wound, on an animal study, but directly on the wound. And you can see at the bottom what I have there in green. It says lack of animal toxicity is predicted that stabilized HOCl has potential pharmaceutical applications. That is, it didn't hurt the body, it didn't hurt the skin, it didn't hurt the patient or the animal in this particular study. But it killed all of the bacteria that they were attempting to kill and made the wound heal better. So I only put that there to show its efficacy and its safety. So it kills the bugs, but it doesn't hurt you. If you can put it directly on an open wound, then you know, it may not be so bad to fog the room. If you look at the EPA has it as a registered disinfectant that is effective against rhinovirus, norovirus, adenovirus, every other kind of virus that you might imagine. And if you notice on the right side there, it shows contact time in minutes. So their suggestion is 10 minutes. And there's a reason for that. Depends on what the study was based on and what they were trying to kill. So contact time is going to be something important that we'll discuss in just a moment. But if you imagine that the norovirus is basically treated exactly the same way that the SARS-2 coronavirus is. And so what they say to kill the SARS-2 COVID-19, you treat it the exact same way as the norovirus. And so if you look up any study on killing norovirus with HOCl, then you can see that it is effective and that they would recommend a 10-minute kill time or 10-minute dwell time. That is, the solution would have to sit on, the virus would have to sit on the solution either way. It would have to be in contact for 10 minutes. And that is to kill 99.999 free log base 10. You'll see in just a moment. The point of the matter is it kills just about every darn thing that you want to kill. And so, so the EPA register has that registered as a good solution to kill the norovirus as well as the COVID virus. Every time I've ever talked about hypochlorous acid, I get hit with 1,000 questions about parts per million. So I want to cover a little bit about parts per million so you understand a little bit. They say that to work with food, you would use 250 to 200 parts per million. To kill certain bacteria and viruses, 200 to 400 parts per million. And the idea is the higher the parts per million, the more things that you can kill, and the more things that might be difficult to kill, you can kill with a higher parts per million. And I don't disagree with that, but it is a little convoluted. In fact, in those examples, their suggestion is that those are based on a kill rate of 30 seconds to a minute. So the longer that you have it on the solution on there, on the surface, then the more opportunity that you'll have, even if it's at a lower part per million. Part per million, by the way, is difficult to ascertain for a couple of reasons. One is because I don't know what color that is on my little test strip. I don't know, is that purple, is that black? Is it black, or is it really black, or is it super black? Or what color black is it? There's lots of colors of black. Now, I'm a man, I don't really see all those colors. I don't even know what fuchsia is, but I'm certain that you all have a better handle on that than I do. My point is that 200 parts per million, or is that something less than 200 parts per million, or is it more? Not to mention those test strips aren't designed to measure higher than 200 parts per million. So it may be 10,000 parts per million. I have no idea. All I know is it's dark in color. And then there's something else I'll show you in a minute that talks about parts per million again. But if we look at concentration times time, the idea is the higher the concentration times the amount of time, the higher the amount of time that you have the solution on what you're trying to kill, well, the more kill rate that you'll have. So if you have a lower concentration and it's on there for a longer time, you can still kill it. If it's a higher concentration, you don't need nearly as much time to kill it. The formula goes something like this, and so this is the part where you'll nod off just for a bit, but I won't dwell on it. The idea is concentration times time, and so it's pretty easy if you just rule it down to that. But it's simply stated that the higher the concentration, the less contact time that you need. Even 50 parts per million will be effective against this virus and all of the other viruses that we're concerned about if you give it enough time, which is the reason why they recommend 10-minute kill time. So if you have a dwell time or a kill time of 10 minutes, if the solution's on the surface for 10 minutes, you're likely to kill just about everything that you need to kill. So I mentioned ORP and my difficulty with parts per million. I think ORP is much more important. I think ORP is more accurate and easier to determine. So this is the one that I'll read to you. And so it's a little long, so here I go. Much of the literature discusses parts per million of HOCl or parts per million of free chlorine ions, that is FAC, AFC, same thing, free available chlorine. It determines the effectivity of the disinfectant. Parts per million is difficult to accurately determine and due to the inability to accurately distinguish between free available chlorine. The parts per million reading often reflects combined chloramine rather than free available chlorine. So I won't read the rest of it out loud, but the idea is that what parts per million tells you is that there's chlorine there. There are chlorine ions in there, but it doesn't tell you where they are, and it doesn't tell you how effective they are. So if you have an ORP reading, it tells you the reduction potential, that is the oxidation reduction potential, that is its ability, its effectiveness to kill something. And so If you know that the ORP reading is 650 millivolts or higher, then and that was based on drinking water studies, based on potable water to kill all of the microbes that might well be in water before you drink it. So you might have a very high part per million, but those parts per million of chlorine may well be bound up into the hypochlorite ion, or they may not be free and available. They may not have any level of effectivity. As I mentioned, even with sunlight, those chlorine ions are going to kill less than if it were in the evening. And by the way, whenever I make my solution of hypochlorous acid, I put it in a jug and I put it in the refrigerator. I cool it down and I keep it dark in the refrigerator, and it lasts longer. It's more stable. The pH remains in the appropriate range and the ORP reading remains high. So I know that it's a very effective and a very safe solution. And it doesn't really matter as much where those chlorine ions are. They're there and they're effective. They're working. So this article from Pool and Spa News shows very clearly, I'll just read the quotation. Free chlorine is a quantitative measure and ppm is a ratio. So ORP measures the qualitative result, its ability to kill the virus, the bacteria. So this is, well, those are my fingers in that little jug there. So you can see that ExecTech is a pH meter and the Apera unit is an ORP meter. I don't work for any one of these companies and I don't know anyone who does, so I'm not going to gain anything from any one of them. But what I want you to know is that I think that you need something to measure your solution. I think it's important for you to understand you have a pH that's 3 point something that is going to, based on the literature, be giving off chlorine gas. Not a lot of chlorine gas, not enough to cause anybody any problems. It's not. I'm not worried about my staff members creating a solution that's inappropriate and then, fogging my patients to death. It's not going to hurt anyone, even if they do it wrong. But it's not as an effective disinfectant unless it's in the appropriate range. And so if you know that your solution is predictably in the 5 to 6.5 range every time that you make it, and every time that you store it, and every time that you allow it to sit on the benchtop, you know exactly what the pH range is. So you know it's an effective disinfectant and it's safe. Then you measure the ORP reading and you can see whether or not it's above 650, and I prefer it to be above 850 in that range. But then you can measure the ORP rating and know that your free available chlorine is effective, has the oxidation reduction potential enough to kill all the things that you need it to kill. Whether you buy an ExecTech one or an Apera one or this Hanna Instruments one that is both a pH meter and an ORP meter, or another one, it doesn't really matter to me, just so long as it's effective and that you understand what it is that you have in your little water tank, I don't know who the individual was that had the difficulty with the Korean model or the cheaper model. But if you don't know what's in your solution, it can cause you problems. It may have a residue, or it may have salt particles that get into your filters, or it just may not be ineffective, or it may just give a malodor to your office. And I don't think any one of those things are a good thing. When it's really simple and easy to do and not terribly expensive, I think it makes sense. So fogging, and I'm getting towards the end, just so you know, and so you can begin to wake up. But fogging is something that I recommend. I think that it's something that's very easy to do, and I think it has a level of effectivity that will make some sense. This picture was taken from an article from the UK where they're developing these, well, it's not a room, but these little devices that you walk into. And so you showed one in your office that you spray, and others in a different office that they would spray the patients. And this is the same thing. You just sort of walk through it and it fogs you. And so they're developing these things in Dubai, and they're selling them in the UK, and they're going to put them in public places outside of public transit and outside of buildings where you go in, and then they know that you've been debugged as you walk in. And so clearly they believe that it's safe, or they wouldn't be offering it to the general public. So I just wanted you to see that. And then a couple articles here. There's only two that I'll show you here. And one thing I wanted you to see was in the title, it says inactivation of the human norovirus. Now remember what the EPA said was that killing the norovirus, you would do it the exact same way to kill the COVID virus. And so if you look down towards the bottom, it says that 99.9% free log base 10. And so that's important. Basically, it killed everything. And so you'll see that again later. So this one also shows that you can kill the avian flu, the bird flu, in the same way. This one says 2.5 log base 10, but that's within 5 seconds and at a solution that is a smaller parts per million. They studied 50 parts per million, 100 parts per million, 200 parts per million. They didn't, however, discuss ORP, so you'll just have to sort of take my interpretation of the literature about that, or look it up yourself, which would be great, and then we could all understand it better. And safety. Now, hypochlorous acid is produced in the body. It's produced in the lipid of the white blood cell, and so our body fights infections with hypochlorous acid that we produce ourselves. So you would imagine that it can't be terribly harmful for individuals. And even the EPA studied it and showed that using it in food contact surfaces and eating places and dairy processing equipment and wherever there's dairy and food equipment and wherever there's food processing equipment. Now you can see it also says not to exceed 200 parts per million of total available chlorine. And so as we began to develop these protocols for the COIS Center, then that's what we settled on was 200 parts per million and keeping it in the safety range, keeping it with the EPA recommendations so that we could make sure that we were being safe. Truth is, you can use a higher part per million and kill more things. Just we had difficulty in trying to put something out to the masses, and for you to delegate to your staff members that maybe don't understand all of this, and say that you could use something that had 1,000 parts per million, and then they would squirt it in people's mouths or whatever they would do with it. And so we wanted to make sure that everybody was safe. So if the EPA and the CDC and all say 200 parts per million, we can produce 200 parts per million. We can leave it on there with a contact time of 10 minutes, and we can kill everything. We can kill things faster with a higher part per million or a higher ORP. But that's the beauty of the ORP is even at 200 parts per million, if your ORP is 850 or 1,000, then you're still killing all of those bacteria and viruses with a lower contact time. Remember, concentration times time. So the ORP value tells you how reactive they are. So even if you have a smaller number of free available chlorine ions, if they're more effective at kill, how many snipers do you need if you're trying to kill someone on the street? No, I don't recommend that. So just so you know. And then as far as safety goes, these two articles show that they developed solutions for ophthalmologists to place droplets in patients' eyes to kill the bacteria. So they're actually placing it in patients' eyes, in their eye drops. So it showed a nice kill rate and did not cause the patient any difficulty. So you've already seen a video, so I think what I have to do here is stop this, but I just wanted to show you the video that I have. There's two of them, but they're short. And so now if I can share this again, oh, that one. Can you see the video? Is it running? You're on mute, so I can't hear you.
Yes. Yes, yes,
Okay,
Dr.
so it's running. Thank you. So I just wanted you to see, people get worried about fogging. This isn't the best video on fogging, but people get worried about fogging. They think that they're going to spray water all over their surfaces and they're going to kill their computers and they're going to kill their equipment and they're going to be all wet. And you can see it's a very fine mist, and the particle sizes are, well, my recommendation anyway, an ultra low volume fogger is less than 50 microns. So very small particle sizes. If you keep the particle sizes small, then it does several things. One is it doesn't wet the surfaces. Can you see that video playing as well? Yes, okay.
Yes, it's still playing.
Thank you. It doesn't wet the surfaces, and it also floats around in the air. So it will float around the same way that the virus might, and will have a more effective kill. This is a friend of mine, Dr. Chris Piquel, and he's just discussing some of the nuances of the mist and the fact that it's not big droplets that are wetting the operatory or wetting the office. So you can see he sprays it up into the air, so he allows it to get up to the ceiling, and then the droplets will drop down onto the surfaces and kill the virus that may be there. Here he's saying just hold it horizontally so that you don't create air pockets in the water line, so that you don't get spurts of water popping out. Okay, so those are all the videos that I'll show, and then back to this. Let's see now. How do we make hypochlorous acid? Well, get yourself an e-clean machine, right? Now, they've put this together for you, that you can see the instructions on how you might do it. And I'm certain that they'll make those available to you in some way, so you'll have all of that information. But it's relatively simple. Basically, you need to get yourself a machine, and we've already discussed that it's not terribly expensive, and you know, you're going to make multiple solutions of these. I recommend to you that you make a solution every day. As I mentioned, though, I have made multiple batches and in different formulations, and I've stored them in my refrigerator, and it's dark and cold in there, and I've been able to maintain a solution that has somewhere between 800 and 1,000 ORP with a pH of somewhere between 4.5 and 6.5. And I've been able to maintain that solution for a month and a half, 2 months. And so after that, it gets a little acidic and begins to smell a little. And so I just decided to cut it off and not store it for long periods of time, particularly no longer than a couple of months. So we actually have our staff make this every day, and so then we utilize that solution each day. If we have some left over that we didn't use it all in that day, then we'll put it in the refrigerator so that we can have it for tomorrow in case we accidentally use too much tomorrow. But beyond that, we don't store a lot. As I mentioned, I think it's important for you to have some way to measure your pH and some way to measure your ORP. So I prefer to have a digital pH meter. I think it's more accurate rather than trying to see what color that is. Some of us are colorblind, and some of us can't tell the difference between green and yellow green and yellow blue and green blue. I don't know, whatever they are. And so I think the numbers are more quantitative. I think you can get a better idea of what you have there. And then I think you need an ORP meter. Again, it doesn't have to be this one, or the ORP meter and the pH meter could be the same meter. And then I think a fogger is a great idea, whether it's this fogger or another fogger, an ultra low volume fogger. My criteria basically is pretty simple. A ULV fogger that you can drop the droplet size down to 50 microns or less. Less is better in my estimation, but at least below 50 microns, and something that's not terribly noisy, because you're going to be spraying this at different times in your office and you don't want to disrupt your flow. So that's pretty much that. And so where you get that is up to you. Just for the record, the hydrostatic foggers. As we began to discuss these things, a lot of people wanted to get a hydrostatic fogger, and they gave me 100 reasons why they wanted one. And what I found is that hydrostatic foggers use or sprayers use static electricity. There we go. Thank you. It's late here. You can't hold that against me. They use a static electricity, and static electricity is a very weak electrical current, and so it only is good for just a few inches. So if you're fogging things 8 inches or less away, then the current, what did I call it? I already forgot. There we go. That will only last for a period of time, so they won't wrap around things. And that was the whole idea, is they wanted to be able to spray something here and have it go all the way in here and all the way around in one spray, rather than just spraying on the side of whatever it is that you're trying to spray. But that's only going to work if you're less than 8 inches away. So they're much more expensive, and my estimation just aren't going to give you any value for that. So I would tell you just an ultra low volume fogger, and you're in good shape. And then what you're going to need is some distilled water and either non-iodized table salt and some vinegar, or the catalyte. Now, some people like to make things on their own, and some people like to have it prepackaged for them. And I don't care one way or the other. I mean, basically the catalyte is a salt and it is an acid. And the purpose of the vinegar and the purpose of the acid in the catalyte is to get the pH at the appropriate range. Otherwise, it's salt and water. So whether you use the salt from the store and add some vinegar, 3 milliliters of vinegar, 2 grams of salt to 1 liter of water, that would be fine. Or you add the catalyte and skip the vinegar and the salt and have it prepackaged for you. Doesn't matter, we'll give you the exact same hypochlorous acid that has the exact same pH and ORP readings and has the exact same disinfectant properties. So that's up to you, whatever makes the most sense to you. But get yourself an E-Clean machine and get yourself some iodized water, and decide if you want salt and vinegar, and then enjoy the process of killing all the bugs and make sure that you have that level of safety and that level of confidence. And that is all I have prepared. And so basically, if you have questions, then Dr. Regina, you can direct me that way. I'll stop sharing my screen and then you can.
Okay. Let me just share. It's just our question and answer screen. All right. Oh, but it won't show me the questions. Okay. One of the first questions here, Dr. Jeff, is about that fogging. There is such a thing as a thermal fogger being sold here in the Philippines, and apparently, what we are recommending is not. It's a ULV cold fogger, right?
Yes, called a cold fogger, and the thermal foggers, they don't help the properties of the HOCl, so they're of no benefit. My opinion,
because
it's of no value for this process. No great value.
Not to use a hot fogger, no?
Correct.
Okay. And then there was a question of here in the Philippines, they are also selling HOCl per gallons. Those are found in the market that they can actually buy. So what would be the difference between those and those that we actually use and quickly made in our own offices?
Right, so as I mentioned earlier, HOCl is not stable as HOCl. It always wants to revert back to salt and water or into the hypochlorite ion. So hypochlorite, actually sodium hypochlorite, has a pH of 10 point something, or close to 12. And so it's a very basic product. And so we need a weak acid to be able to have the hypochlorous acid to be able to have the most effective disinfectant. It's difficult, however, to keep the pH low and to store it and to put it in different environments. Like if you're shipping it, it may be hot in some areas, and so you have to do something to it. And so the companies will err on the side of having a more basic solution so that it's more stable, but they'll have less disinfectant property. They'll have more hypochlorite ions. Now, some companies get smart and they still want to sell a product and they still want to have an effective product, which is great. And so they have to add something else to it. And I'm not suggesting that that's wrong. All I'm suggesting is that something has to be added to it to keep it at the appropriate pH. And what is that something is going to depend. It's going to be proprietary to the company. And so I don't know what I'm getting, so I would prefer to know what I'm getting. And if it were difficult or impossible for me to make it on my own and have an effective product and be predictable and safe, then I would certainly buy it from someone else. However, or, like I think I said, if it were difficult to do, if I couldn't delegate it to my staff, then I may well buy something prepackaged. But my opinion is it's simple, it's easy. You can make it in just a few seconds, and it's not a burden for you or for your staff members. And I'm imagining that it's going to be cheaper to produce on your own than it is to buy it from some company who's got a markup.
And you really suggest to make it every 2 days or every day?
I do.
Because
I make
the
it
question
every day.
is, how long does it really last? So that we just don't keep on checking and checking. I think it's just best to do it every day or every other day.
I think so, yes.
Okay.
It certainly can last, but I think that it's fresh and clean and easy, and you know exactly what you have every day.
Okay. Dr. Laureta has some questions with her.
Yes.
All right. So, Dr. Jeff, in relation to the question of Dr. Morales, so let's say, for example, we decide to make a batch, store it in the ref as you recommended. Better in a colored bottle, right? So that it's not exposed to light. Is that so?
Yeah, well, my refrigerator in the lab stays closed primarily. We don't open it that much, and so it doesn't really matter for me because it's not going to be open and closed and exposed to light all the time. But dark and cold keeps the product at the appropriate range longer.
Yes, but possibly in our homes or in our clinics, we have our refrigerators, and that will be opened and closed a lot of times during the day. But at any rate, would you recommend that every time we use the product that we've already made previously, that we do check the pH or ORP?
I do. It's a one-time expense. You purchase it one time, and then you can check it. And it's very easy to check. You put the meter in, and it gives you a number, and you say, that's perfect, that's where I wanted it to be, and then you're done. It takes several seconds.
Yes, okay. So aside from fogging, we can use it to wipe surfaces?
Yes.
Right. And
You
if we do that, how long do we have to leave it on?
Well, based on the literature, since we're trying to kill in our offices, we're trying to kill all sorts of different microbes, potentially, and viruses, then we would want to have a dwell time or a kill time of 10 minutes.
All right, so we just leave it on for 10 minutes. No need to wipe afterwards.
That's the beauty of the fogger, is that you can fog it and forget about it. You don't have to wipe it down. You don't have to wipe it off. It evaporates and it stays right there, and it kills things. And so you don't have to worry about it. So for me and my office, and what we recommended at the COIS Center Task Force, was that for the staff members to have best practice and to have always protocols so that they don't have to ask you, what should I do this time, doctor? What should I do this time, doctor? You know, should I use this time or this time? I hate those questions. So I would much rather have an always protocol where they wipe down the room the same way that they always did with their regular EPA registered disinfectant, the same way that they would turn around a room and then fog the room. And then that way, 10 minutes later, you know, you've killed everything that may have been lurking around the corner, that may have drifted down from the ceiling or from an aerosol procedure or from the patient's sneeze or, you know, whatever it is. You know that you disinfected the room and you've also protected yourself even further with the fog and with HOCl.
So fogging and disinfecting in between patients is recommended.
At the COI Center, what we settled on as a group was that you would fog every day, just in the evening. And many of my colleagues have taken that fog at lunch, or they'll fog, you know, a couple of times a day. And many of them fog between every patient. The difficulty for some of them is they have maybe larger practices with multiple doctors and in between patients with lots of patients moving around. Foggers, they're not silent. And so they didn't want to disrupt the entire flow of the office by fogging between every patient. So they're only doing it once or twice a day. Now we fog between patients just because we can, it's easy. And, you know, if my patients complain about the noise, I tell them how safe I'm keeping them. And they seem to be okay with that.
Thank you, Dr.
Actually,
Jeff.
Dr. Reta, I also have a classmate in practicing in Texas now, Rhea, and then she just recently bought the machine and the ULV fogger. Same question was that, is it going to be noisy? And her reply really helps psychologically the patients that you are doing more for them. And then I asked, are you actually using this every day, or I mean, every after patient or at the end of the day? The cute reply was, she was using it if there is a suspicious patient that actually walks, and that's the time that they will really fog the place right before. But I guess everybody now has a lot of suspicious patients as well. So
absolutely,
yeah.
and it appears that there are many more coming, and many that are asymptomatic and have maybe even low risk, but still are carriers.
Yes, indeed.
Dr. Jeff, I'll go through some of the questions in the chat room.
Okay.
Here's a question from Tan Pek Cheng. Will the solution corrode metal surfaces in the long run?
So we haven't noticed anything other than in the foggers, in the reservoirs, in the foggers, that the solution will then create some rust of the screws in those foggers. We haven't noticed anything in the operatories, in the treatment areas, in the offices, because we're not dousing the surfaces. They're very fine particles. They're 40 microns or 30 microns, and it's not wetting the surface. So it's not been an issue. And the literature, much of the literature has been done in the dairy industry and in the farm industry with animals, and they have stainless steel drums that they use to collect the dairy products and store them and whatnot. And they're not reporting rust in those either. So what I would say to answer the question is relatively no, but where the solution sits and is liquid in those reservoirs, then you may well have some rust or some corrosion associated with that. You know, sort of like at the ocean. You know, if you put a screw in the water in the ocean, then you know it's gonna corrode.
And another question from Lourdes Masa is, HOCl safe to use as a pre-op mouth rinse?
So safety is not a problem. In the task force at the COI Center, we decided against recommending it for a pre-op mouth rinse, just because we didn't have all of the study all the literature that we have with iodine and with peroxide. So we believe that it's effective, but we don't have all of the answers, and so the concern was, what if what we don't know becomes a problem? We don't want to make recommendations for people that could potentially cause some sort of an issue when iodine is cheap and peroxide is cheap. So it didn't make a whole lot of sense to make a bold recommendation without the science.
So better for pre-op mouth rinse would be iodine and hydrogen peroxide.
Yes. We use...
How about sorry, go ahead.
That's okay. We use a product that is called CTX4. It's basically a bleach product. We use it for disinfection of periodontal pathogens, as well as caries prevention, decay prevention. It kills all of the bugs. And because it's a hypochlorite, sodium hypochlorite, it is very effective as well. So the product is called Carie Free, and CTX4 is the specific product.
How about for using the solution to soak washable PPEs? Would you recommend that?
So yes, you can certainly use HOCl to disinfect your PPE. The problem, though, is none of the PPE is as effective if it's wet. So the fibers in the masks and gowns, then they don't trap the microbes and the viruses as readily when they're wet. So if you're going to fog them, or well, you wouldn't want to spray them, is my point. You know, you could certainly disinfect them, but you don't want them wet.
I see.
So we don't do that in practice. We just use disposable stuff.
Dr. Jeff? Yes, Dr. Morales, go ahead.
Now there was a question here, is why is it the suggested salt to use is non-iodized, not the iodized salt?
Yeah, we don't want to add more chemicals to it. We just want the sodium and the chlorine. In fact, we don't even want the sodium, but we have to get the chlorine there somehow. And so safe and easy with NaCl. And so we start adding other chemicals and other ions and atoms to mix, and you end up with other products potentially.
And also, can HOCl be used to clean our dental lines or tubings?
Yes. In fact, there are many folks that use a lower concentration, a diluted concentration in the water lines, and they just put it in their water. And so anytime their water goes through the line, it disinfects itself. I believe they're using 20 parts per million or 50 parts per million. But again, even at a low concentration, that way you can still kill all the bugs. If it's safe for water in potable water and safe to disinfect your water to make it potable, then why not in your water lines? And your patients aren't swallowing a lot of water from your water lines anyway, so it's really not a non-issue. And even if they did, it wouldn't be a problem.
Laureta?
Yes, Dr. Jeff, another question is it safe to use other chemicals with it? For example, just use it for fogging, then another chemical to spray on the dental chair.
Yes, and in fact, that's exactly what I was recommending, was to disinfect just as per your usual, and then fog behind that, and just let it evaporate and dry on the surface, and then, you know, in 10 minutes you've had the appropriate amount of dwell time. But the chemicals there's not a lot of chemicals in there. So there's not a lot of things to react to cause caustic issues. So that has not shown to be any issue.
Okay, the next question, Dr. Jeff, is do we just discard the HOCl that has become acidic after some time? Can it be reprocessed?
I suppose the most appropriate answer to that question is I don't really know. I didn't study that, so for me to say that you could, I wouldn't have science to back that. So I hadn't really considered it. I just assumed that it was past its shelf life and didn't have the appropriate pH or the appropriate ORP reading for me. So it was of no value to me, so I discarded it.
So just throw it down the drain, that's all.
I do.
It's safe to do that.
It's in the water already.
Okay. So are there studies that show that HOCl fogging actually kills the SARS-CoV-2 virus that has been aerosolized? And in addition to that, and in relation to that, if we fog our clinic with HOCl, will that give us an assurance that there will be no more SARS-CoV-2 in our rooms and fomites will all be eradicated?
So when I did all of the studies, it was early in the process. Nobody even knew about COVID virus and what it was and how to kill it. And so there was at that time no science to show that it would be effective specifically against this virus. However, they did study extensively several other viruses, particularly the norovirus. And then again, as I mentioned, the EPA showed that you would treat the COVID-19 virus the exact same way that you would treat the norovirus. And if it's effective against that, then their studies showed that it would be effective against the COVID-19 virus as well.
Dr. Jeff, there's a question on when you inhale the fog or the possible mist as well, will it have any effect on your lungs or on your respiratory system?
Yeah, so I looked in the literature specifically for that question, and I didn't find anything that showed that that it had been studied. And so, as I mentioned before, hypochlorous acid is formed in the body. We make it ourselves, and so there were some studies that they did where they were injecting people with hypochlorous acid under their skin, sub-Q, and then those people had some difficulty, but it doesn't. The amount that they were placing in there and the way that they were doing it, then of course was the reason. And so the idea is that if you look at the chemical makeup of it, it's already there in the air, it's already there in the water, it's already there in the body. So I wouldn't recommend to you that you ingest it the same way as you shouldn't with any liquid in your lungs. But there's no study to show that inhaling it is going to be a problem for anyone.
Okay. Doc?
So is it also safe to be used in sensitive areas like baby nurseries? Can it be used to clean the feeding bottles of babies?
It has already been for decades. As I mentioned in the beginning, they use it in diapers. And so it's placed in the diaper to kill the bacteria and decrease the odor. So yes, it's used in nurseries, it's used in hospitals, it's used in and on and around children, and has been shown to be safe and effective.
It is supposed to be odorless, right, Dr. Jeff?
Yeah, so I say relatively odorless because I do notice a bit of an odor. But early on when I was playing with the different formulations, then I had more odor. And then when I began to test with the ORP meter, then I found out why. because there was more chlorine gas, there was more Cl2. And so my pH was lower than it needed to be. Even though the test strips showed me that I was in the right range, once I had a properly calibrated pH meter and a properly calibrated ORP meter, I knew much more clearly what was in my solution and why I was having the difficulty. So I was able to adjust the amount of vinegar to decrease the amount of vinegar. Now, just for the record, because the question may come up, the company recommends, I believe, 5 milliliters of vinegar to 1 liter of distilled water, but I found that that was too much, and the reason is because if you look at the pH of water, you would imagine that the pH of water is supposed to be 7, but the pH of distilled water is 5.8. So already we're a bit lower than, or a bit on the weak acid side already just from the beginning. So I found that if you added 5 milliliters of vinegar to a 5.8 pH solution from the beginning, now your pH has dropped well below that and into the 4 range. And so then that's when I would begin to have an odor. When I keep my pH in the 5 to 6.5 range and my ORP in the ideal range, then I don't notice the odor. And what I do notice is kind of a clean smell. It's not a chlorine smell, but it's kind of a clean smell. I can't really explain what that means exactly, but I don't, it's not distasteful.
Mm-hmm. Do you think we could add something like essential oils to improve the odor? Is it possible to do that? There's a question about it.
Yeah, so I've been asked that question before, and the only thing that I can say is probably. I don't have science to back it, but I would imagine that that you know we already can use essential oils in the office and diffuse them and create a different atmosphere as far as what lavenders or whatever that may be have a calming effect, that sort of thing, and certainly make our offices smell better. And so probably it would do the same thing if you fogged it. But I don't have data, so I can't say with any science backing.
So Dr. Jeff, you talked about the proportion of 5 milliliters of vinegar to 1 liter of distilled water, but that gave you a lower pH than that was desired. So for the recipe, if we're not using the catalyte, how much vinegar, how much non-iodized salt would you add to a liter of distilled water?
I settled on, I tried to keep it simple and, you know, stay at 1 liter. By the way, the markings on the canister are not accurate, and they're uniformed throughout all of them. That's fine, but it's not exactly 1 liter to fill to that line, but it's close. And the scoop is not really an accurate 2 grams of salt, or 1 gram in each scoop, and because you're not measuring it, you're not weighing it. If you were weighing it, then you could say that you had 2 grams, but it's just a scoop, so it's going to have a little bit of error. So the difficulty in that is, do you have large particles of salt, or do you have smaller particles of salt? And believe it or not, some salt has more salt in it than other salt. So the difficulty is understanding the amount of salt that's in your product. So what we used, and the reason why we used it is because my assistant went to Walmart and just picked some salt off of the shelf that was non-iodized, and it happened to be Morton's salt, and they were the small granule sized salt, and so 2 grams of salt, 1 liter of distilled water, and I settled on 3 milliliters of vinegar. The vinegar is a 5% solution. It comes that way. It's diluted to 5% with distilled water, and then 3 milliliters of that in the solution, and then effectively will drop the pH to the 5.5 range.
For walking through the
Doctor,
fogging machine, sorry, Dr. Morales, I just asked this. If we're going to ask our patients to walk through that fogging machine, how much time should they be exposed?
So we don't know specifically, other than to say that we want for the solution to cover all of the surfaces, right? So we want it to cover their head, we want it to cover their body, their clothing, but we don't want to wet them, right? So if you noticed in the photo that I showed, kind of like at the airport, you know, you put your arms in the air and allow the machine to spin around. So I think what they're doing in the UK is they're just having people walk through them. So they make it so that the spray has the appropriate droplet size, and then the length of the tunnel determines roughly how long they'll be in it. So that didn't answer your question specifically, but you know, just like fogging the room, you don't have to dwell on it. You don't have to just sit there and wet the surface. You don't want them to notice that there's something on them. You want it to just cover them and be a very fine mist and evaporate very quickly, so that they have no awareness that they have something on them. So 30 seconds, something like that, is a small amount of time.
Okay, Dr. Morales, you have a question?
yes. Can HOCl replace alcohol? Is it good for our hands? Can it be used for washing dishes? Those were the questions.
Right? Yes, yes, and yes. It certainly can. But again, it's about contact time and concentration, right? So what are you trying to kill? And so hypochlorous acid, if you're washing your hands with it, as opposed to using a gel, a hand sanitizer, then are you getting it into all of the surfaces? Because it's just like water. You can't tell anything different than water. Whereas a surgeon will scrub their hands and their fingernails, and they'll get everything out from underneath everywhere, and all the little grooves and their fingertips, and so they'll be sure to kill all of the microbes. If you just have a very thin solution like water, then are you sure that you're getting it all off? And I don't know the answer to that. But yes, it is effective, even as a liquid solution. And if you're allowing it to sit on your hands for the appropriate amount of time, that's another issue. How long are you going to allow the solution to sit on your hands? If it requires a 10-minute dwell time or a 10-minute kill time to sit on your hands, are you going to keep your hands scrubbing them in the HOCl for 10 minutes? Do you need all that amount of time? And the answer is probably not. It just kind of depends on what you have on your hands, what you're trying to kill. And so the only difficulty in telling you, yes, you can use it for this and not have to use some other product, is depending on what you're trying to kill and how effective how concentrated your solution is, and how long you're going to let it sit there.
Okay. And then in the machine, it was mentioned that for 60 ppm, that you can use it for vegetables and fruits.
Yes.
What makes it a big difference if we use 100 ppm for vegetables? Will it make it any different? Will it disinfect more or not?
Yes, so I mean, certainly, assuming that your free available chlorine has a high ORP rating, then all of the chlorine available would be at a higher parts per million. That ratio would then kill more things. When the EPA does studies to suggest that you can use it on this product or that product, then they're not just looking at efficacy of kill, but they're also looking at safety of the people that are going to ingest it. And so, I have not done all those studies, so I wouldn't want to say that you should alter from what they suggest. But looked at the papers from the EPA, they did say 200 parts per million. So I personally wouldn't have a problem with 100 parts per million on vegetables, or straight out of this eClean machine, I wouldn't have a problem with it on my vegetables either.
And then they are requesting for you to show again the picture of the ORP meter that you.
Yeah, you'll have to unshare your screen, I think, and then I can.
And I think, Dr. Jeff, we have to stress that it's not just the buying of the ORP pH meter, but it has to be calibrated very well.
Yes.
Even if you buy the simple pH ORP meter, not all of them can be easily calibrated.
Right. So these are two, well, there's three different meters there. The X-Tech, the green one there on the left-hand side is the pH meter, and the Para is the ORP meter, and then the one on the slide photo is an ORP meter and a pH meter. And yes, every pH meter and every ORP meter will need to be calibrated. And the way that they're calibrated is with a calibration solution. You have to have a solution that has a specific ORP and a solution that has a specific pH. And then you have to calibrate the instrument to that. Those two that you see that I use, the X-Tech and the Apera unit, they came with solutions. Now, I have some colleagues and some friends who had difficulty when they received their meters. They couldn't seem to get it to calibrate appropriately. And what they found out was the calibration solution. There were three that came with their pH meter. And one of them is a 4 pH, and one of them is a 7 pH, and one of them is a 10 pH. And I can't remember now which one it was, but one of them did not have the proper pH to it. So they were able to find another calibration solution that they knew had the appropriate pH to it, and then they calibrated it, and it was fine. But yes, you need to be able to calibrate it appropriately and make sure that what you have is reading properly. Otherwise, it's of little value.
Thank you. Dr. Laureta?
Dr. Jeff,
Yes.
have you heard any reports of allergic reactions to the solution? Any side effects like on asthmatic individuals?
I have
Have
not.
there been reports?
So it's similar in my mind to epinephrine. You know, we've all had people tell us that they're allergic to epinephrine, and we're not really allergic to epinephrine because we produce epinephrine in our bodies. So if they were allergic to epinephrine and we walked up behind them and scared them, then they would die. So don't do that. I don't recommend scaring all your patients. We scare them enough, I suppose, but or maybe that's just me. But anyway, so if we produce hypochlorous acid normally in our body, then it would be a rare occurrence that someone would be allergic to it.
That's good to know. About the vinegar, is there a particular type of vinegar that you use?
No, it's acetic acid. That's all it is. And all we're trying to do is decrease the pH so that we have the appropriate range.
For the water, it's really recommended to use distilled water and not just tap water.
So the companies suggest that you can use tap water. And my problem when I developed the protocol is that I'm dealing with people all across the world. So is my water the same as your water? Is my water the same as a person 5 miles away from me? What minerals are in your water? What chemical compounds are in your water? What's the pH of your water? I don't know. So what I needed to do, or what I felt like was the most appropriate thing to do, is to minimize as many variables as I could so that I could develop a always protocol that people could follow the recipe and have a predictable product. And so distilled water fit that bill for me. And we were using distilled water in our water lines anyway, so I didn't have to buy anything new. I didn't have to explain it to my team members. I just said, get the distilled water, dump it in the jug, and go on.
Actually, same with me. Distilled water here.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear. I
No,
didn't hear
here
you.
I also use distilled water.
Yes.
Wilkins.
And that way we know that we're getting the same thing.
Right. The next question or comment is, I'm confused. Simple fogging and wait for 10 minutes will kill bacteria and viruses. But when asked regarding its usefulness instead of alcohol to disinfect hands, the answer is it depends on the contact time and rubbing of hands. While in fact, in fogging, there's no rubbing and only contact with surfaces, and that's enough to kill the virus and bacteria.
Yeah. So when you fog, it doesn't stay in the air. It drops down on the surfaces. So they are droplets, although they're very small, fine droplets. They're 40 microns or less, 50 microns or less, but they will drop to a surface, just the same way a virus might drop to the surface. And so that was the point. If we disinfect with our regular EPA registered disinfectant, the same way that we wipe down the counters and everything else, we know that we're going to kill that virus anyway, wherever we wipe. But the areas where we might not readily wipe, behind things, behind your light handles and whatnot, you might not always wipe there effectively. And so that's where the fogging would come in, because then you would fog, it would be in the air. If there's a virus in the air, then the droplets may contact that and kill the virus in the air. That'd be great. But I'm not worried about that. I'm not counting on that. What's going to happen is those droplets are going to fall to the counter. They're going to fall to the surfaces. They're going to fall on top of the light or on top of the computer or, you know, whatever's there, and catch those surfaces that we didn't readily wipe. And then that droplet will sit on there and sit for 10 minutes or longer, and it will effectively kill everything that we might have missed with our normal disinfectant.
Dr. Jeff, do you recommend that, let's say, for example, we are fogging? You told us earlier of a report wherein the filters of, I'm not sure if it was the air conditioner or the air filters that were filled with salt. Would you recommend that when we do the fogging, we turn off air conditioners, we turn off our air filters?
Yeah, so that was the original recommendation as we were thinking through the process. We were at the COIS Center Task Force. We were trying to find a way to do this. And that was part of the rationale for people to only fog end of day. So they would turn all of their systems off, and then they would fog and allow the droplets to fall down onto the countertops. And then other people said, well, we can still fog in between patients, and that would be fine. I'll just turn it off while I fog, and then I'll turn it back on, and maybe in 10 minutes. And then other people still just left them on. I don't have a problem with it either way, but if you think about the air purifying systems, if they are a filter type system, then the same problem as with your PPE is going to be there with your filters. They don't want to be wet either. And so if you are wetting them, if you do have a fogger that the droplet size is quite large, then you may well wet the surface. And if that does get in wet the filter, then your filtration is going to be affected. It's not going to trap as many of the viruses or bacteria potentially as if it were dry. So I don't know if that answered your question or not, but that's what people would do, is they would turn it off and then fog either end of day or between their patients.
Yes, because these devices are quite expensive. We don't want to damage them, right?
Yeah, and it was really the filter was the bigger issue than the device.
Do we need to even measure the pH of the distilled water before we use it to make the HOCl in the device?
No, I don't think you need to measure it on your own before. I measured it myself because I wanted to understand what I was producing and why I was producing something different than what the company had recommended, and why I was having inconsistencies with my product, and so I wanted to understand a little bit better why I had what I had, and what I could recommend to someone else to reproduce what I was getting when I got something that was effective.
Dr. Morales, any other questions from your end?
Why is it only now that HOCl has come into light? It's been there for 100 years?
Yeah, it's a fine question. And what I can tell you is, this is my opinion. I'll give you my opinion freely, but it's just my opinion. My opinion is that there's no one making any money off of it. That is to say, hypochlorous acid is not produced by some company. It's easy to produce on your own, and so it's cheap. And so the difficulty is if you don't have someone backing it, someone to do all of the legwork, and that costs money, and all the research that costs money, and then make a profit from it, then promote it and to market it and to sell it, then you're going to end up with something that may well be effective but has no financial backing. So that's my opinion. And so the good news for us is we
exposed it.
Yeah, when we had a need, and we were able to find a way to meet that need and not spend thousands of dollars doing so.
Yes. And I guess we just like to stress that this is just an added strategy. It is not the main thing that would really stop us from getting any infection. It's just more of a add-on,
Right.
if you can say.
I think all of the things that, well, in dentistry we've been very safe. If you look at our track record, particularly since the 80s with the HIV scare, we've been very safe. The number of difficulties that dentists and dental offices have had have been very minor. There have been very few dentists or dental offices implicated in any disease transmission. And so we do a great job of researching things and utilizing things and keeping ourselves safe and keeping our teams safe and keeping our patients safe. It's in their best interest, and it's also in our best interest. And we're not afraid to spend the time and the energy and the money to be able to help people in a safe way. But we're not stupid either. We don't want to have to spend the money. If we don't have to spend the money, that doesn't make any sense. So none of the things I think that we're talking about are going to be magic or a panacea that will cure everything. We're not selling snake oil. We're not trying to cure the world with an aqueous solution. We're just trying to safeguard ourselves. This virus is unknown still. People don't quite understand exactly what we need to do, what we should be doing, and how to do it, and what's the right thing to do. And so I think just doing the things that we've always done have been terribly effective and will continue to be effective. But if we add on something, particularly if it's cost effective, then we're only making the environment safer and giving ourselves and our patients and our team members that greater assurance that we're doing everything that we can to help everyone.
Thank you.
No.
Doctor.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Morales. Dr. Jeff, I heard something about using chlorine dioxide for misting. I don't know anything about it. I was wondering if you had any information or any thoughts about it.
Yeah, well, we've certainly used chlorine dioxide in many products in dentistry for many years. And I haven't studied the effects of that in a fogger and how that might affect the surfaces, your computer systems, all that kind of stuff. So I don't really have enough data to give you that answer. But then my question to you behind that would be, why would you do that when it's not going to be any less expensive and it's not going to be any more effective? So if you already have a product that is inexpensive, easy to produce, and effective, I don't know why I would switch.
Okay. Would you recommend, or how would you compare using HOCl fogging versus using UV lights to disinfect?
So UV light is expensive. That's one thing. And there's been extensive research done, particularly some of the other members of the task force are very well versed in UV lights and their effectiveness in killing the virus. But again, it's inexpensive and it's easy and it's effective. So I have difficulty spending a lot of money for something that I'm not even certain is going to give me a better result. So I would recommend the fogging. I mean, if you were concerned and just didn't feel like the fogging was doing enough for you, you do that first, and then you could look at UV lights as an adjunct to get even more protection. But I wouldn't just throw out fogging altogether and buy something terribly expensive. I would start with the fogging, and then if I felt like I needed more, then I would go to the UV lights.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Another question, Dr. Jeff. If the accepted dose of ppm is 200 to 400 ppm, would you recommend the median dose of 300 ppm for fogging as opposed to 200 ppm?
Well, again, parts per million has very little value to me in that discussion because it's more about the free available chlorine and its effectiveness in the kill. So I would rather have less. I would rather have less chlorine and a higher kill of each of the ions. And so it's like having, well, I mentioned a sniper earlier. It would be like having a very large army and only 2 or 3 of them protected you. And so you could have just those 2 or 3 that are protecting you, and you don't need a large army. So point is 200 or 300 or 400 parts per million, depending on its ORP value, depending on its effectiveness of the kill, may not mean anything. So whether it's 200 parts per million or 300 parts per million in the fogger, I don't think matters one way or the other.
And again, to repeat, the ideal pH would be between 5 to 6.5.
Yes, ma'am. Now you can go below 5, and that's okay. If you look at the data and the graphs that I showed, that the pH even down to 4 still has 100% or so of hypochlorous acid, which is great, and it's highly effective that way. But now you're potentially releasing Cl2, and so that's when you begin to have an odor. So what I found is if I keep my pH at 5 or above, then I don't have the smell, I don't have the odor. I'm not releasing the chlorine gas, and so I have an effective disinfectant with no odor. And then if I keep it below 6.5, then I'm not releasing the hypochlorite ions, and so then that way I have a more effective disinfectant.
And in addition to that, again, when you make the solution, avoid exposure to sunlight, correct?
Yeah, light does affect it. It does make it less effective. It decreases your ORP and decreases the amount of free available chlorine. So while you're fogging, I don't think it makes any difference. But what we're talking about is storing. I didn't know anything about that at first, and then I would store just on my benchtop after I would make the solution. In fact, I would just leave it in the jug and then test it the next day and the next day and the next day until a month later I'm still testing, and it kept getting more acidic and less effective. I had a lower ORP rating. So the longer I let it sit there, then the more gases were released and the less effective it was. When I began to put it in the refrigerator, when I began to leave it in a dark environment, then I noticed that all those things normalized a bit. And so that's why my recommendation is, if you're going to store it in a cold, dark place.
Okay,
Thank you
thank
so
you.
much. I think it's getting late on his side.
So I look tired.
Oh,
Dr.
no,
Fem, do you have
Dr.
any
Jeff.
questions?
I think we give it now to Dr. Fem.
Yes, Dr. Morales. Thank you so much. I hope everyone learned from Dr. Jeff. Uh, are there any more questions? No more? Dr. Morales, Dr. Laureta, Dr. Jeff, do you have anything else to say before we finally end this session?
Oh, just thanks for having me. I appreciate it. It's been a labor of love, and I hope it was of some value.
How about you, Dr. Morales? Do you have
Thank you.
anything else to say before we end this
No,
session?
I would like to be very appreciative of Dr. Jeff's time in sharing all of these new knowledge for us here. And to be patient, maybe in the future we'll ask you again some questions. And by then, that time you will be flying to Manila already, Dr. Jeff.
My wife will be happy about that.
Yes.
Yes, my wife and children as well.
Yes.
After
Okay.
COVID, we'll be clean 50. Dr. Laureta, do you have anything else to say before we end?
Well, I'd just like to thank our speaker, Dr. Jeff, for his time and the knowledge that he shared and for patiently answering all of our questions. I'd also like to thank Dr. Morales for being our moderator, and of course, to you, Dr. Fem and DDM Infinity Enterprise, for hosting this webinar. I hope our questions, our doubts, and fears have all been put to rest about hypochlorous acid. And thank you to all the participants for joining us on this Sunday. Dr. Fem, back to you.
Thank you, everyone. Well, this webinar would not have been possible if not for our sponsor, the Keytech Electrochemical Corporation, with its CEO, Mr. Phil Yun Sang. Thank you so much for making this possible. Also, through the support of MEM Dental. It is because of their generosity that we made this possible. We also want to thank the support of our distributors in Asia, Susan Chin from Malaysia, Vietnam, India, Taiwan. Some of their dentists are listening in this webinar. Of course, Dr. Laureta, thank you for your Sunday, for your time. Dr. Morales, thank you
My pleasure.
for being here for as our moderator, as our host, Dr. Laureta. And Dr. Jeff, it would not have been possible if you said no. So thank you so much for gracing us your knowledge, your time, and for patiently tutoring us over the past days how we will make this webinar successful. Thank you so much, Dr. Jeff.
Thank you.
And to our, of course, to our dear dentists or doctors who are listening all over the world, perhaps. Thank you for your time. I hope you learned so much from this webinar. We recorded this webinar for us to review again soon. And if you have any questions, you may email us at sales@DDM Dental. If you have anything, files from us, if you want anything from us, just contact us. So thank you again. And I hope we can bring more webinars in the future that will be helpful to fight COVID. Especially right now in the Philippines, we are on modified ECQ. So I hope this will become a tool as well for us. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Jeff, Dr. Morales, Dr. Laureta, and everyone else on this webinar.
Coffee. No more coffee.
Thank you, everyone. Have a happy Sunday. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone. Thank you so much.
Have a great day.
Yes, you
You
too, Dr.
too.
Jeff. Thank you. Hope to
Thank
invite you again
you.
soon, Dr. Jeff.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.